So there is a lot of weird stuff going on with the Hunter Biden story, and that's to put it mildly. Think about it for the moment. The mainstream media refused to cover the story. They said it was conspiracy theory stuff. Now, let's be very clear about this. For 3 years, they went with Trump and Russia, basically a conspiracy theory. For 3 years, Rachel Maddow got on her show and ran with one harebrained idea after the next. If it went after Trump, it was fair game. It was chum to liberals who needed something to get them the red meat formed for that particular day, to get them just until they can get to the next day where Rachel Maddow will have more red meat for them where they can feed upon it and keep going. No, that stuff stays up. The conspiracy theory stuff over the course of the last several years stays up. No issue with that. Every leak that has ever come out about Trump is fair game. Social media plays that. The election comes around and Biden, protecting him, becomes a priority in such an overt way that a story comes out on Hunter Biden and some relationships that Hunter Biden is having with, let's say, China, for example. And that gets silenced. Now, however, the story was coming up, whether it was coming up from a laptop or whether somebody was bringing the story up as a result of the story coming up from the laptop, it's almost irrelevant to me. It also gets to the point of, why was it the responsibility of social media to decide that that story was not legitimate, but this other story was? Because that's basically what they were doing at that point. They had no way of knowing whether or not that story was flat fact true or whether that story was flat fact false. And they didn't even give time to figure out whether it was one or the other. And again, considering that the new information that has just come out, that there's a criminal probe looking into Hunter Biden and his relationship with China, it sounds like the story that they censored before that election had more legs than they were giving it credit for. So much so, the Associated Press did an about face. Look at this. And they are basically going into, right here, Hunter Biden probe examining what the, I swear to God, these things are so aggravating. You can't even see the title. Associated Press, your site is trash. That's right, Associated Press, your site is trash. Basically, a tax probe is examining Hunter Biden's Chinese or ties in China. Let's see if we can find one that's a little bit better. Right here. Hunter Biden criminal probe bolsters a Chinese scholar's claim about Beijing's influence with Biden administration. Now that's Glenn Greenwald's piece on it. Yeah, that's Glenn Greenwald's piece on it. So, but basically, the government is looking into Hunter Biden's relationship with China and the influence that these entities had with Hunter Biden. Whether the laptop story was flat fact true or not is irrelevant. I'm getting at, if that laptop thing was a pretext or was a stepping stone that would have gotten this story out, then social media basically censored what was a true story because they didn't necessarily like the stories hitting Biden. And by the way, they didn't even give it time to figure out whether it was true or not. So I'm making this point about censorship and the fact that they got rid of a true story in order to back Biden. What's also more interesting in this criminal probe, and I'll just give the basics. Justice Department is investigating the finances of President-elect Joe Biden's son, including scrutinizing some of the Chinese business dealings and other transactions. A person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press. The revelations put renewed spotlight on questions about Hunter Biden's financial history, which dogged his father's successful White House campaign, were a frequent target of President Donald Trump and his allies, meaning Hunter Biden. They also come at political delicate time for the president-elect, who's weighing his choices on who to lead the agency that's going to be investigating his son. Right there. And that's the part I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. Right now, the fact that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, is being investigated by the Justice Department. Now, the Justice Department says we didn't bring this up because we don't typically bring out information in run-ups to the election, basically saying we try to keep this stuff out of the news. Whether that's true or not is almost besides the point right now. Joe Biden has won the election. Donald Trump has even acknowledged that Joe Biden won the election right here in a tweet. Now that the Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess for years to come. In order for it to be a scandal-plagued mess, Trump, it would mean that he won, and it would mean that he's going into office, which would mean you lost. Just saying. All of those things would have to be true for this tweet to exist. Meaning it could be a scandal-plagued administration. Joe Biden could get taken out in some kind of impeachment. Kamala Harris could become president. All of those things are coulds. There are a lot of coulds. Any pawn could become a queen. That is very true. But will it? What are the chances of it? I don't know if this is the bang for the buck. Maybe, maybe not. But the tweet indicates that you recognize you will not be there for it. Now the Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess for years to come. It'll be easier for the Supreme Court of the United States to follow the Constitution and do what everybody knows needs to be done. They must show great courage and wisdom and save the United States. Implicit in that also means you lost. First point. Biden administration will be a scandal-plagued mess. Second point. For that to happen, Biden has to be in office. Third point. For the Supreme Court to do what you are saying, the Supreme Court would have to say, we get that Biden won, but because Biden is going to be a plagued mess for years, we are going to pretend that he didn't win, and we're going to give you the election. Look, 3,100 people died the other day, and Donald Trump is trying to basically overturn the election results. He is not doing his job while telling people he wants to keep the job that he is not doing. If you get 3,100 people down on your watch, just sit down and stop. Just stop. Look, the main point that I want to make for this video is the interesting dynamic that Hunter Biden, and depending on how deep that investigation goes, how long that investigation goes, what that investigation specifically pertains to, because we don't know. We just know that they're dealing with dealings in regards to his financial relationships. And we know ourselves, the Associated Press had to do this kind of about face and go into some of the issues. It isn't clear which entities or business dealings might be tied up in the probe. Well, let's, right here. It isn't clear which entities or business dealings might be tied up in the probe, though the person with knowledge of the matter said at least some of the focus was on his past work in China. Federal investigators served rounds of subpoenas on Tuesday, including one for Hunter Biden, according to a person familiar with the investigation. Investigators did not reach out until recently because the Justice Department practiced against overt investigative actions in a run-up to an election. Hunter Biden has a history of international affairs and business dealings in a number of countries. Trump and his allies have accused him of profiting off of his political connections and have also raised unsubstantiated charges of corruption relating to his work in the Ukraine in the time his father was vice president and leading up to Obama's administration dealings with an Eastern European nation. They are gutting the story as they tell it, and they are being dishonest, flagrantly so. Anybody with a brain, with eyes, and has any level of cognitive ability can understand that Hunter Biden had just got drummed out of the military, drug addict. He gets a job in the Ukraine with no experience in the Ukraine, with no experience in oil and gas, and he's on the board. Joe Biden, at the exact same time, is basically the viceroy of the Ukraine. We're supposed to believe that they gave Hunter Biden that position for experience sake, and not because his dad was basically viceroy of the country and they were potentially investigating the company and his son for corruption. I guess I'm making the point that you're making all of this money and you have no experience. It's nonsense to believe that he wasn't influence peddling, especially since there's a history of Joe Biden and his kid influence peddling over the course of Joe Biden's 47 years in Congress. Meaning, this is not abnormal behavior. This is behavior that is perfectly in line with how they've functioned over the course of the last 47 years. So you could try to get the story at the knees, but that just discredits the telling of the story. You want to understand why people have lost faith in media and lost faith in news. It's stuff like that. You're basically telling people that what they know to be true is not. There is no spoon. And in telling people there is no spoon, those people basically lose faith in your ability to perceive and explain reality, which is basically your business model. News. If the people don't believe it, they're not consuming it, and you've lost credibility. That is a big deal. And that is, I suspect, what is taking place in regards to fake news and all of this other stuff. The interesting thing here, Biden is assembling his cabinet. He's been putting all of these random Obama people. Susan Rice has been plucked recently. Pete Buttigieg is going to get his payoff for his help in the election and the primaries. I'm curious if Elizabeth Warren is going to get any payoff for all of the work she did in the primaries helping Joe Biden get elected. That's going to be interesting. But more than anything else, this criminal probe, and depending on how deep this criminal probe goes and how extensive this criminal probe goes, it gives credibility to the argument that that Biden is corrupt, or at the very least has pins in him. That the relationship between Hunter Biden to China affects the dad. Now, this is something that was argued by a Chinese scholar. This was an article that Glenn Greenwald put out, where the guy makes the argument that basically that China has deep relationships to Wall Street because of the relationships that have been created between the companies and the businesses and everything else. And with those deep ties to Wall Street, that reflects itself on the presidency of the United States. So anything that may come up or any issue tend to get resolved pretty quickly, with the exception of Trump, because the mechanism didn't necessarily entirely work with the Trump administration. It will, however, go back to normal with Biden, which means that the issues and the relationships between the United States and China, and for that matter, between Joe Biden and his family and China, create influence. So the argument that Trump was being influenced by Russia, now, Biden apparently has a much wider degree of influence, or there's much more influence being expressed on Biden from the standpoint of China because of the relationship of his kid, but also because of the relationship of Wall Street. It's very interesting. I mean, the guy apparently was getting excited about it. He was like, yeah, we're going back to normal. We're going back to normal. We're not going to have these fights and trade wars and everything else. We're going back to status quo with Joe Biden. And I know this because Wall Street and China are interrelated with one another. And if Wall Street is pushed by China, that push goes to the presidency. That's basically the point. And I have to be honest, how can I argue with the logic, right? Whether it's flat fact true, I don't know. But there is a logic to it that does make sense. Now, Obama was going to use the Trans-Pacific Partnership as a way to try to curtail China, this quote-unquote Asian pivot. But the Asian pivot never got to take place. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was basically a takeover, a giveaway to corporate America by the Democratic Party. The public was entirely against it. The Democratic Party did not care that the public was against it. They were going to put it through anyway. China has been doing their Belt and Road Initiative and been putting a huge amount of money into infrastructure while we have been just blowing it up in the Middle East. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So who is Biden going to choose for these cabinet seats? And who is he going to put for the Department of Justice? And the person who he puts for the Department of Justice will basically be overseeing the case for his son. Do you remember when this happened? Where is it? right here. Let's go back in time for a moment.
I did see President Clinton at the Phoenix airport as I was leaving, and he spoke to myself and my husband on the plane. Our conversation was a great deal about his grandchildren. It was primarily social and about our travels.
That was Loretta Lynch talking about, it was about her grandkids. Now, she said when Bill Clinton and her met on the tarmac, they talked about her grandkids. Now, remember what was going on at the time. Hillary Clinton was being investigated. She was being investigated for something that was a criminal investigation. This, while she was running for president. Yes, it sounds ridiculous, and it is true. Loretta Lynch was overseeing that case. Now, if you remember, Loretta Lynch was put in by Obama. Obama also put in Hillary Clinton to be his Secretary of State. Now, Loretta Lynch, Democrat, clear political ideology in regards to who she represents. And we're supposed to believe that she had no influence on that case. When Comey said he was being influenced by the Justice Department. And we don't know how far that goes, nor do we know how much Comey would ever even say on that particular topic in an honest setting. And so we're left with this thing that we know she was getting influence, but we don't know the extent of that influence. She ends up meeting Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton is having a conversation with her. His wife is about to be perp walked, potentially. Bill Clinton, husband, nervous, meets Loretta Lynch. It doesn't matter what they talked about. She could have been talking about lint. The very fact that Bill Clinton was there is the point. I hope you understand what I mean. Bill Clinton doesn't have to open his mouth at all. Bill Clinton could have just stood there and looked at her. The very fact that Bill Clinton's presence is there in and of itself is the message. Don't get rid of this shit. My wife, get rid of it. That was the point. Bill Clinton didn't have to say anything. His face told it all. His presence was the message in real terms. Look, I'm just pointing out that I don't know who Joe Biden is going to put for the Justice Department, but it is a very weird situation that the President of the United States comes in and immediately has to deal with the stuff revolving around his son and influence. Once again, instead of it being Russia, this time it being China, been wrapped in knots over political influence once again. This is going to be Russiagate, potentially. Once again, this time going into Chinagate. This one seems to actually have a little bit of smoke behind it. We'll see. All I'm saying is, right now, as things go, Joe Biden will have to choose a Justice Department that will be overseeing a case involving his own son and his ties to China. Ties, mind you, that may also dig into Joe Biden, which means that the Department of Justice, who Joe Biden is going to choose, is going to be looking into a case of his son, but also, tangentially, we don't know this yet, could be looking into a case dealing with Joe Biden. Why wouldn't it? If Joe Biden really does have ties to his son, if Joe Biden really was entering into these kind of weird relationships with his son and all of these business dealings, if his son really was trading off of Joe Biden's name and Joe Biden knew it and didn't do anything necessarily about it, if the investigator is having an honest investigation looking into it, and he does find something, meaning a tie between the Chinese and Hunter Biden, let's say some connection, some measure of influence, and then the question becomes, well, wait a minute. Does this have any effect on Joe Biden? Wouldn't the prosecutor, almost by definition, have to ask that question if something is there for Hunter? Yes. Why wouldn't he? It would be malpractice if he didn't. It's not necessarily saying that there's something overt that creates a tether. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the question in and of itself has to be asked. The very person who Joe Biden is putting there that is going to do that investigation, even if they choose a special prosecutor, it is still indirect influence into the person being chosen for that indirect prosecution. Are they going to scuttle this? I don't know. What Justice Department is going to be looking over it? Is it going to be Biden's Justice Department? Yes. And if so, is it infinitely reasonable for Joe Biden to not want his kid to go to jail? Yes. Then is it possible that the person he chooses will not let his kid go to jail. Now, the thing at this point you have to deal with is managing image. You have to manage credibility because people are going to call BS on it. They're going to say this is nonsense. This is BS. This is the Comey letting Hillary Clinton off again while admitting that Hillary Clinton was guilty of sin. That's what this is. But just like the Comey thing with Hillary Clinton, the public can look at that and know that it's BS. The public can say that woman is guilty of sin. The public can say that if this was any other random person, they will be under the jail right now, not just in a jumpsuit. The public can say that. The public can realize that. The public can be completely right on that. But the sliver of doubt in and of itself is enough. The patina of this kind of legal process, even if you know the legal process wasn't necessarily on point. It's the managing the doubt, managing the disbelief, the managing the lack of legitimacy. You just need a wisp of legitimacy, a wisp of some kind of process that has an infinitesimal chance of doing what should have been the goal in the first place. And that typically gives enough to coast. I don't know what's going to happen with this case with Hunter Biden. I would think, though, that if the Justice Department is being chosen by Joe Biden, he's not going to choose somebody that's going to lock up his son, or for that matter, look at tethers that may tie back to him. I suspect that the person he chooses will not scuttle this case, meaning he's not going to come in and get rid of it. Again, you have to manage legitimacy, manage the credibility of the office, and manage the credibility of what's taking place. But they will probably do what Loretta Lynch did. I'm being hands off. I'm just kind of, being hands off. I'm not doing anything with this. I'm not choosing this. I'm just going to let this go. We're going to call a special prosecutor. Whatever you do, there's still influence. So we'll see. I mean, I haven't heard people talk about this one. To be honest, though, I haven't really been looking for people to talk about this one. I just thought that of all of the aspects of this, this is one of the most interesting. Joe Biden is going to choose a Justice Department that is going to be investigating his son and potentially, almost by definition, investigating Joe Biden himself. Wow, that's amazing. Like, share, and subscribe.